Northern Ireland, a small step to a giant adventure. Book your next giant adventure at discovernorthernireland.com.
Well, fáilte go Féile and Phobail ó Áras Ó Conaill. I want to welcome you to Féile ó Phobail, and I'm here at the James Connolly Visitor Centre on the Falls Road. My guest today is Albie Sachs, who joins us from South Africa. So it's a privilege and honour to speak to Albie, who was an anti-apartheid activist, human rights lawyer, and was Nelson Mandela's appointment to the first Constitutional Court of South Africa. In fact, he had a major role in drafting the South African Constitution. We're going to talk a wee bit about that today. But firstly, Albie, you're no stranger to Féile and Phobail. You delivered the PJ McGrory Lecture in 2018 in Belfast. And you have been to Belfast and Dublin and Ireland on many occasions. I think I've seen that you described an emotional, almost an existential connection to Ireland. And maybe you could tell us a wee bit about that before we talk about your role in the anti-apartheid struggle.
Yes, well, the very first time I arrived in Belfast, and I was on my way to Derry. I was then teaching law at the University of Southampton. Quite conservative people in charge of the administration, but we loved each other. And I didn't know whether to call it Londonderry or Derry. So I kind of danced around that issue. And I was on a commission of inquiry headed by Lord Gifford into the Bogside shootings and killings. And sadly, coming from South Africa, I had a certain experience in police, army, military shooting down people in public gatherings. So it was straight to Belfast, down to Derry, and quite an emotional occasion. And one only wishes that those themes had been followed up earlier, and people had come to terms, and the British had come to terms, and the people of that area had come to terms with what happened. Unfortunately, it didn't. But it nearly cost me I was spectators for many years, living in London. And when after 7 years, I applied for British citizenship because being stateless was very inconvenient for travel, I was visited by somebody from Scotland Yard. Very, very clever guy, very friendly and easygoing, not like the cops I was used to. And he suddenly said, "What do you think about the Queen?" And I was astonished. I didn't think anything about the Queen. I'm living in a monarchy, so the British should decide that. And I was totally discountenanced. And I tried to think, what do I think about the Queen? I'd grown up in an anti-monarchist family in South Africa. And in that sense, I boycotted the visit of the royal family in 1947. But I didn't think much about Queen Elizabeth. Anyway, I gave the most unsatisfactory answer possible. And I couldn't understand why he asked me. I got my citizenship, and as soon as I got back to free South Africa, I was able to renounce my British citizenship. But I realized it's because I'd been on that commission of inquiry, and they could only assume that somehow I was in touch with Sinn Féin, the IRA, which I wasn't then, and I've only encountered them many, many years later. So that's my first visit. My second visit was some years later, when people were pushing for a Bill of Rights in the United Kingdom. It was called Charter 88. So it would have been in 88. I'm still in exile. And I still remember the taxi driver taking me from the airport to the Europa Hotel. And I said, "I believe this is the most bombed hotel in Europe." "In the world," he said, "in the world," with a certain kind of pride. So that was my second visit, a very interesting discussion with quite a few senior people and about a Bill of Rights. And then I was promoting the idea of a Bill of Rights being something not just for the Fenians, for the Catholics, for the Republicans. A Bill of Rights could be important for the Protestants if they feel they have a certain identity, things that are important to them as to who they are. a Bill of Rights could protect them, not to oppress, not to marginalize, not to discriminate, but to follow their beliefs and their cultural practices and celebrate their important days. It didn't get a very good hearing from anybody there. I think the Republicans weren't very happy with that, and the Loyalists certainly weren't happy with that. But then I kind of fast forward, I'm invited to come to Belfast to speak on criminal law and procedure, very technical stuff for lawyers. And it happened to be on a Friday that I was due to speak. And it wasn't only a Good Friday, it was the best of Fridays, because it was announced the Good Friday Agreement had been reached on that particular day. And I said, criminal law and procedure, forget about it. I'm going to speak about our experience in South Africa of a nation that was torn apart, that had been fighting for centuries against each other, and how we managed ultimately to get peace in our country and to get constitution, to get a Bill of Rights. The next encounter that I remember, not the next time I was there, invited to speak to ex-political prisoners. I can't remember the name now of the person who organized it, but I'm ex-political prisoner myself. I was detained in solitary confinement in South Africa. I was tortured by sleep deprivation. We ex-political prisoners have a kind of a visceral bond all over the world. And here I'm meeting the prisoners who were trying to kill each other and locked up in the same prison in different sections. And I look around and I thought I'd be able to tell who were the Republicans and who were the Loyalists. I couldn't. They all looked like rather tough, working class Belfast men. The tougher ones, I suppose, were the Loyalists, I was told. The more cerebral ones were the Republicans. This is the story that reached me afterwards, that while the Republicans were reading and some preparing for the PhDs, the Loyalists were making out. In any event, there they were in the same room. And it was very emotional for me speaking to them and trying to encourage the idea of connecting. They were the ones who did the fighting. They were the ones who caused the damage, but also suffered the most in terms of damage physically to themselves and being locked up. And if they could connect up and say the war is over, that would be hugely important. It wasn't so important for the top political leaders to get together. Of course, that mattered. It was important for the people on the ground who'd been doing the fighting to get together. And I told them a story, and I'm going to tell the story to you now, because it still moves me. After I was blown up by a bomb when I was working in Mozambique by South African security agents, I get out of a hospital in England. I've lost an arm, sight of an eye, and I'm out of hospital, and I set up the South African Constitution Study Centre with a view to imagining and planning for and thinking about a new constitution for South Africa. And one day I'm very busy working, knock on the door, and a very British voice says, I'm so-and-so, so-and-so, and I've just returned from Belfast, and I was at the Long Creche prison, and I had a session with the editorial board of the Sinn Féin publication in the prison. And they mentioned to me that they'd read your book, The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter, and had a big debate. Is it possible for a freedom fighter to cry? Because I'd mentioned that I had cried. And I'm kind of astonished. And this is in the heart of that prison. And he said, by a majority of 3 votes to 2, they decided it is possible for a freedom fighter to cry. Sort of looking back, now this would have been late 1988, 89, maybe represented a division inside the IRA of some of the old veterans who didn't cry, who don't relent, You give away nothing. You're willing to fight to the death. And a younger generation thinking about how can we get peace in our country, get our ideals without all this killing going on. In any event, I'm very embarrassed because I don't want to say to this British guy, well, go and tell them this, that, and the other. Because at that stage, people like Margaret Thatcher were saying the ANC is a terrorist organization, just like the IRA. Now, the ANC might have had contact with the IRA. It wasn't for me, an ordinary member, to be sending messages that could end up with British intelligence and be used to keep Mandela in prison for any longer. So I didn't give a return message, but I felt a little bit ashamed. This was something that came from the heart of people in prison, and such an emotional, beautiful, lovely thing to happen. So I tell that story now to the ex-political prisoners in the, is it the Tom Wolfe Hall? Not Tom Wolfe, the Protestant who led a rebellion in...
Oh, Wolfe Tone?
Wolfe Tone, yeah. Maybe it was a hall in that library. Yeah. And I had 2 copies of the South African Bill of Rights on a scroll. And I gave one to the person, her name might come back to me, who organized the event. And I said, I've got one over, and I can't cut it in half and give half to the Sinn Féin and another half to the loyalists. I don't know what to do. And is that McMurray? In any event, she said, it's easy to tell you, Albie, who must get that document. She said, well, gosh, now I'm blocking out names. His name will come back to me. We became good friends afterwards.
Yeah.
The editor, who got a PhD afterwards, and wrote a book about bloody Fenians, and he changed the title a bit afterwards. You might remember the name.
Yeah.
In any event, the person you should have sent the message to, you didn't send the message to, is here in the room. Will he come forward? And so I handed it over to him, and everybody applauded, and we hugged each other. And the interesting thing for me was a Northern Irish hug. Men are very taut in their bodies. You don't give away too much emotion. We South Africans, we're all over each other. In any event, it was a very, very, very moving occasion. So I've been to Northern Ireland on other occasions, and it was sad traveling through the area, seeing names that I'd got to know through massacres, through bomb explosions. When the geography and the politics and destruction get entwined, it takes a long time, if you like, to decontaminate the meaning and understanding of these different places. But the very last time I went was maybe 2 years ago to give that lecture. And I really felt there are problems, there are tensions, but just as you decontaminate for landmines, the most explosive, I felt, the most explosive elements had been removed, that people are getting on with their lives, that there isn't that sense of dread that was there all the time. There's fear, there's concern, and there's still people who refuse to accept the agreements that have been reached. But I really felt a sense of not prosperity, because it was a time of austerity generally, but a sense of calm. It was impressive for me to meet the deputy leader of the Sinn Féin, a woman. Yeah, who belonged to another generation of lineage of freedom fighters, as she would say, but with a different aspect, a different kind of a spirit and presence. And she'd just been on a gay pride march, an issue being taken up. So instead of it being a one-issue organization, Unity of Ireland, with a few subsidiary questions about poverty and discrimination and so on, it's now becoming an organization that's picking up on the themes of the day. And there were people on the march from across the divide. Isn't it fantastic that gay rights, the theme of gay rights, is uniting Republicans and loyalists? Maybe more Republicans than loyalists are there, but it's a theme outside of the issues, but so important for humanity and for dignity. In any event, so I came away feeling very, very uplifted by that visit.
Okay, just I'm going to stay with Ireland just for another question. And you mentioned the South African Bill of Rights. As I understand it, the first draft of that was written on a kitchen table in Dublin with your colleague Kadir Asmal. Is that correct? He was in a lecture, I think, at Trinity. So again, that was another trip to Ireland, which obviously
that was yes. So maybe I distinguish between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but Dublin I've been to a few times, and very, very different. My connection there. I remember the first time I went, it was actually to Cork to give a lecture. I was a lecturer at the University of Southampton then, and I felt like a freedom. If I gave lectures to universities on apartheid in England, I'd say we're fighting for freedom, and then someone would put up your hand and say, Dr. Sachs, how will you define freedom? Oh, no, I don't believe it. If you've been oppressed, you're fighting for freedom, you don't go in for definitions. You've lived it. It's in your soul. It's in your body. There are margins of freedoms and the countervailing factors. In Ireland, I could speak about freedom without having to give definitions. And I felt that. And this was a generation, the grandchildren of the freedom fighters, but there's something in the culture that I could connect with. Padraig Ó was phenomenal. He actually became the Dean of Trinity College, Dean of Law, and two future Irish presidents were influenced by him, Mary Robinson and McKillisey. Very influenced by his vision, his excitement about law being an instrument of resisting oppression, of emancipation, getting out of the technicalities of law. And wherever I went in Dublin, people would greet Padraig Ó. He claimed he was the only South African Indian Irishman in the world at that stage. And he combined the best of all three, with the vivacity and the loquacity, if you like, and the enjoyment of life that is very Irish or very Dublin, and very much the circles he moved in. Seamus Heaney was a good friend of his, but also with that South African warmth and thoughtfulness and willingness to embrace everybody, and aspects of Indian culture of deep thoughtfulness and importance of principle and connection between your beliefs and the way you conduct yourselves. In any event, it was on his kitchen table in Dublin that now I'm out of hospital and I'm asked by Oliver Tambo and the ANC leadership, the Constitutional Committee of the ANC, to work with Padraig Ó to produce the first draft, not of the Constitution, but of a Bill of Rights for a future democratic South Africa. And I sat down at that table in the kitchen. I said, no books, pencil, paper, my heart, my brain, my memory. A Bill of Rights must proclaim itself. It's not something you get from literature, from reading, from drafts. These are the fundamental things about being a human being, the claims that everybody should have, whether they're in Italy or Burundi or South Africa or Ireland. And I sat down and I wrote, I don't know how many there were, and Carter checked it out afterwards. He dealt more with the procedures for enforcement. And we checked up with the books, the declarations. They were all there. They were all there. So it was a huge moment for us because until then, we'd spent our whole lives breaking down, tearing down, denouncing, exposing apartheid. Now we were building. We were creating. We were healing. it was a huge transition psychologically, emotionally for each of us. It was a real pinch me moment on my long arm pinching my short arm. Wow, we're creating the foundations of our new constitution. Now, many years later, we're telling the story of how we got our constitution. We can't find the document. We can't even find that kitchen table. The Aswells returned to South Africa. There's a plaque on the wall outside. That's all. The only proof that we actually wrote that document is a plaque put up about 10 years ago on that wall outside.
Well, I must look at it next time I'm in Dublin. I'll have a look for that plaque. A wee bit of history was made there. I'm just going to ask you, just in terms of the volume again, I'm getting a slight bit of feedback. Again, Albie, if you don't mind, maybe just checking your volume, maybe putting it down a wee bit. Is that okay?
Sure.
You turn the volume down slightly.
Oh, sorry. Okay, it's almost on silent.
Yeah, we'll continue. It's just a wee bit of feedback, but sure, we keep going. You were born into a South African family of Lithuanian background and went to study at Cape Town University. And you first became a political activist during the defence.
Wait. I went to the University of Cape Town.
Cape Town, yeah.
And my family came from Lithuania, from Jewish. They were refugees from the pogroms.
Yeah.
Where Jews would be attacked every Easter time. So fleeing to South Africa, my dad became the General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union. He met my mother in the Young Communist League. He was later expelled from the Communist Party for right-wing deviationism, which was apparently a very serious thing in those days. But my mom stayed on, and she became the General Secretary for Moses Kotane of the Communist Party. So it was a white woman working for a black man. And I grew up in that home.
Well,
my mom was saying...
You may have answered my next question, because what I was going to ask you was how a young white lawyer became involved in the anti-apartheid struggle. I know you got involved in the defence campaign, and then you started to represent those on the racial laws. But obviously, from what you've said, your mother and father were a big influence in that direction of travel. You didn't take the easy route to be a commercial corporate lawyer. You took the hard route to fight in the struggle against apartheid as a lawyer. So that was a difficult decision, but probably a wee bit easier for you who grew up in that background. Is that right?
The easy route for me emotionally was law in the service of the struggle of the people for rights. And people say, Albie, you sacrificed so much for the struggle. Are you comfortable with South Africa today? I didn't sacrifice. If I had done commercial law, that would have been a sacrifice. I would have been sacrificing my soul, my spirit, my idealism, my vision, my excitement about the world. And here I was, so privileged. Privilege granted to me by my skin, whether I wanted it or not, which meant more than just access to education. It meant you could dream to be anything in the world. White skin in South Africa. You want to sail around the world, you want to fly to the moon, you want to discover a microbe smaller than anybody discovered. You could imagine all those things. The privilege of belonging to a freedom struggle, a wonderful freedom struggle. Mandela's well known, Oliver Tambo, the Sisulus, so many others in that struggle. It was marvelous. It wasn't a sacrifice belonging to that movement. Then the privilege of helping to write my country's constitution. How many lawyers get that chance? And the super duper privilege of being able to sit on the court that's now applying the values of that constitution. Wow. And if that's not enough, helping to design the court building, helping with the design, with the program of the design, the character of the building that we put up in the heart of the old Fort Prison. Old Fort Prison in Johannesburg. Imagine now if you had put up your top court in the precinct of Crumlin Road Prison, or the precinct of the area of Longkesh, the emotional significance of that, and having tremendous colleagues and a beautiful constitutional text. So I don't feel I've sacrificed anything. I've enjoyed the benefits of being in the struggle, And the sacrifice would have been to follow an ordinary, boring career, to become important and rich and famous within the structures of a very exploitative society.
You've mentioned, obviously, that you were detained. I think on one occasion you spent 5 months in solitary confinement. You then went into exile in England, and in 1988, you were very seriously injured in an explosion in Mozambique. I think you were lecturing at the university. And you wrote an extraordinary book about your experiences called The Soft Vengeance of a Freedom Fighter. And it's a book that I've read, and it was very, very, very moving book. Can you maybe explain the title of the book and what you mean by this notion of soft vengeance of a freedom fighter?
Yes, I'm lying in hospital, at the London Hospital in London, and I get a letter, and I love telling the story. Do you remember those things, letters, that we used to lick the envelopes and put stamps on, just to locate it in its historical period? And I open it with my one hand, and it says, "Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. Signed, Bobby." I think, avenge me? We're going to cut off the arms. We're going to blind in one eye the people who did these things. Is that what we're fighting for? But if we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get the rule of law, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And that theme of soft vengeance became the theme of my life afterwards. And soft vengeance is actually more powerful than hard vengeance. Hard vengeance just means now we're in charge. Now we are stronger. Now we can do to them what they did to us, we can retaliate. But mentally, psychologically, we're at the same level as them. Soft vengeance means now our ideas are triumphing. Now our ideals are becoming the ideals of society. In that sense, we're winning a much bigger battle to humanize our society than we could ever win simply by sending people to jail, by beating them up, by saying, now it's our turn. You did it to us, we're doing it to you. So that's my theme of soft vengeance. And of course, it's the soft vengeance that enabled this freedom fighter to cry in the book. And that's how the story picks up with the story of the connection with Sinn Féin.
Yeah, it reminds you of the quote of Bobby Sands, the hunger striker: "Our revenge will be the laughter of our children." So it sounds like the same kind of thing. I picked the book up again and looked at it over the last few days, and because I knew I was going to be interviewing you. And in the preface of the book, you said that if somehow you could be offered your arm back, you would refuse. Some people may find that comment surprising. So maybe explain what you meant by that, because I know that you have you've said about your injury that every little detail became a moment of discovery and breakthrough. I had an absolute conviction that as I get better, my country get better. So you link your injuries and your recovery from that in some way with South Africa and where South Africa was going. And that's I'm sure that was a very difficult thing for people to understand, but maybe you could explain that for us.
Yes, well, there are two aspects to. The one is my healing. This happened to me because of my participation in the struggle. And the participation becomes so much more meaningful if we achieve what we set out to achieve, the humanizing of our country. That's hugely healing to me. So that's the one aspect of it. The public and the private, the personal and the political, I can't separate them out. If you like, the mind, the spirit, the body, I can't separate them out, and I don't want to. It's my mind that gives my body a sense of vitality and energy, and it's my body as it is that keeps my mind healthy. And I had to make a number of discoveries as a disabled person that I could only get through experience. And I ended up with this notion of the democracy of the disabled. It doesn't matter how it happened. Were you born that way? Were you driving drunk? Were you shot by the police? Were you blown up? Doesn't matter. We are all disabled. But the disability, the most significant aspect, is not things we can do and can't do. It's how society looks at us. Society disables us with compassion, pity, horror. And the worst aspect of having a short arm is not, I can't dance the way I used to dance, but these days people don't hold on when they're dancing. I can't cook as well as I used to cook. A few other little things I can't do as well. But by and large, I can do everything with my left arm. If you lose a leg, a prosthesis is everything. You lose an arm, you carry on. The one thing that's hard is, or can be hard, is you look like a freak. And it took an experience of me sitting in the Rose Garden in Central Park in London, just out of hospital. It's hot. And should I take off my top or not? Oh, it's hot, it's hot. I said, I can't take off my top. I'm ugly. People are coming here to look at roses. And in the end, I said, to hell with it. I took off my top and nobody cared a damn. They just walked past. And I felt, being the romantic that I am, I'm so glad I took possibly the most important decision of my life, surrounded by roses. But that was, for me, central. If I feel ugly and a freak because I've got the short arm, people will look at me like that, and I will be inhibiting myself. If I feel comfortable with myself as I am, this is the way I am, people pick that up as well. And so that's why I don't want my arm back. I certainly didn't want a prosthesis, a false arm, to make it look as though I'm like everybody else. The only value it was for me was it could be a very good paperweight when I'm writing something. That's not a good enough reason to have a false arm. A false leg is fantastic. Implants in my teeth, sure. But a false arm, I don't want to. I don't want it. Thank you very much.
You met the man that planted that bomb, which caused your injuries. And I suppose that maybe helped develop that notion of soft vengeance. Was that part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or was that through other means? And maybe you could tell us about how you felt when you met that man. Maybe how.
Right. So now I'm not Comrade Albie Sachs. I'm Justice Albert Louis Sachs, Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. I'm in my chambers. You guys have an office. We judges have chambers. And my phone rings and reception says, there's a man here called Henry who says he has an appointment with you. And I said, send him through to the security gate. And my heart is going boom, 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 boom. Because Henry had phoned me to say he had organized, on behalf of South African security, the planting of the bomb in my car. He's now going to the Truth Commission to ask for amnesty if he tells the whole truth. And will I see him before he goes there? And I said yes. And I open the security door and I see him. He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. And in his eyes, I see, so this is the man I tried to kill. And I'm thinking, this is the man who tried to kill me. We didn't know each other. We'd never met. We hadn't fought over love or money or a job or anything. But he was on that side, I was on this side. We go to my chambers and he's striding like a soldier. And I use my best judge's ambulation to try and slow him down. We sit down, we talk. We talk. He tells me, came from a good family, did very well at school, university. He joined the military and he's bragging about rising up in the military, in the hit squad. He doesn't realize how bizarre it is. And in the end, he tells me about the bomb attack on me. He said, in fact, they delayed the explosion for various reasons. And he was withdrawn from the matter. But when he heard afterwards I was killed, he knew that he'd been responsible for planning it all. There's a strange connection between us. But I admire the fact that he's willing to come and see me and look me in the eye. And he's going to the Truth Commission. He's one of only 2 soldiers who went to the Truth Commission. The police, many went. Many security policemen went. The soldiers, no. And I said, Henry, I've only got your face to tell me what you're saying is the truth. Normally, when I say goodbye to someone, I shake that person. I can't shake your hand. But go to the Truth Commission, tell them what you know, and who knows one day. And when we go back to the security gate now, he's not striding like a soldier. He's shuffling along like a defeated person.
Yeah.
I forget about him. Carry on with my work, working very hard. It's Christmas time, which is summer in South Africa. A friend invites me to a party. I go to the party, and the music is very loud, and I hear a voice saying, Albie. It's Henry. He's at the party. These were filmmakers who did a film of the 2 soldiers who went to the Truth Commission. And we get into a corner, and he's beaming. And he says, I went to the Truth Commission, and I told them everything. I met Bobby and Sue and Farouk. Bobby, the same Bobby who'd sent me that note. And I told them everything, and you said that one day. And I said, Henry, I've only got your face to tell me what you're saying is the truth. And I put out my left hand. I shook his hand. I almost fainted. He went away. Huge smile on his face. I heard afterwards that he suddenly left the party, went home and cried for 2 weeks. I don't know if it's true. I want to believe it's true. I'm not even following up on the story. I'd rather believe it's true than discover it's not true. And for me, it's more important that he had those emotions than that he goes to jail. Going to jail won't bring me my arm back. I don't even want my arm back. But the fact that he has now discovered more humanity inside himself, that's profound for me. And in a sense, we needed that to get a country. This is one example of that. So when I came to write the book, I would say The Soft Vengeance for a Freedom Fighter became the title of the book. Second edition now, Henry's on the scene and he gets mentioned in the second edition of the book.
Okay, well, I must get the second edition. When we first met in Havana, where we were doing work on the Colombian peace process, which was hosted by the Cuban government, I think sponsored by the Norwegian government, as far as I remember. And we had chatted there, and you told me that your proudest moment was being involved in the drafting of the Constitution. So I wanted to ask you about that Constitution and what role it played in peace and reconciliation in South Africa. So I know that you were very, very proud of that. And I'll talk a wee bit later on about your role in the court, but just in terms of the Constitution itself, how important was it for South Africa?
For us, the Constitution was everything. It was a peace treaty to end everything from conquest to the liberation struggle. It was an agreement of how we were to be governed, like any constitution is. And it was our equivalent of independence. South Africa was an independent state more or less from 1910, when self-government was given to the whites in South Africa. The black people didn't take part in that independence. The Governor General was called the Supreme Chief of all natives, who were his subjects, to be administered, not people with citizenship and rights. So the form of our struggle then was a national liberation struggle for self-determination. But the form that it took, self-determination, was not a separate state, severing ourselves from the metropole. It was to destroy the internal colonial structures. So we got, if the theme was self-determination, the modality was democracy through the electoral system, one person, one vote in a united South Africa. The Constitution in that sense was our Declaration of Independence as well. It gave us a nation. It wasn't an unfortunate nation, an unequal nation that got a constitution. We weren't a nation until then. We were people living together in one country under apartheid, kept apart, with all these pseudo-independent Bantustans, division everywhere, and the whites being in control, owning 87% of the land by law, 95% of productive capital. Now the Constitution gave us the mechanism for all being equal in South Africa. The majority would be Black people, because the Black people are the majority. We would have majority rule, but it would be majority rule subject to a Bill of Rights that would ensure we wouldn't have new forms of oppression. So our Bill of Rights then became the counterpoint for majority rule. It came together with majority rule. It's important the two came together. If we just had a Bill of Rights without majority rule, it would have been seen as a Bill of Rights, preserving the status quo. If we just had majority rule without a Bill of Rights, there would have been fear that the Black people would do to the whites what the whites had done to the Black people. So the two coming together, we had to find the document that would unite those two. The other big thing we had to find was the process. How would we get a constitution? Not at Lancaster House with representatives of warring parties and British lawyers in charge. Icon, as we say in South Africa. We had to do it ourselves. But we couldn't have a constitution simply drafted by experts and then put to the nation, take it or leave it. And we had to determine who would decide on the constitution, how would they decide. And we invented a two-stage process of constitution making. The negotiators, self-appointed, in what was called the World Trade Center, very gloomy buildings, not spectacular at all, outside Johannesburg, near the airport. The political parties, the South African government, the ANC, and political parties supporting us, sitting around the table. We developed mechanisms for decision-making, and we agreed on a two-stage process of constitution-making. We would draft a constitution to get a constituent assembly, like India had, with a mandate from the nation, elected by everybody in our first democratic elections, would draft the constitution. But the constitution would have to comply with certain principles agreed to in advance. Multi-party democracy, a Bill of Rights, separation of powers, levels of government, national, provincial, local, a whole range of different things. Customary law, traditional leaders, all of these aspects had to be dealt with. We agreed on the principles in advance, and we left it to the newly elected first democratic parliament of South Africa, sitting as a constitutional assembly, to draft the constitution. We invented that. I think each country must invent its own modalities, not only for the content, but for the process of getting the final constitutional document. And Parliament was given 2 years, and they finished, I think, 3 hours late after the 2 years. They announced that it was ready, and they had to send it to the Constitutional Court to see if the constitutional principles had been complied with. We spent 10 days hearing arguments for and against, quite extraordinary. And eventually we decided that the Constitution was unconstitutional. This never happened. Overwhelmingly, it was okay, but in 9 respects, it failed to comply with the principles. We sent it back, the corrections were made. Finally, we said the Constitution is now constitutional, and we now have the Constitution of South Africa, which is held up as a model to the world. Yeah. Progressive, modern constitution.
Well, as you say, it's perhaps the most progressive constitution in the world, and certainly it embraced political and civil rights, which is very important for South Africa, but importantly, it also enshrined many socio-economic rights, which is the poor cousin in terms of international human rights to the political and civil rights. And I wanted just to speak to you about the development of the socioeconomic.
And I just add, it also included in 96 environmental rights, and included rights in relation to sexual orientation. In 1996, overwhelmingly Black African Constitutional Assembly, this very, very progressive, forward-looking constitution.
Yeah, and many of its best-known judgments were on discrimination law. And I think you were the author of the court's majority judgment and Minister of Home Affairs, the Fury, maybe I'm pronouncing that wrong, Fury, in which the court declared unconstitutional South Africa's statute defining marriage between one man and one woman. So you were involved in a court which went against, on occasions as well, the ANC government. I remember you telling me that as well in Havana, that you were proud that the Constitutional Court stood up and oftentimes went against the ANC government at that time.
No, excuse me interrupting. The court made the declaration that the Marriage Act was unconstitutional because it said IAB, take UCD, to be my lawful wedded husband/wife. It left out same-sex couples. So it's unconstitutional, not because it targeted gay and lesbian couples, but because it made them invisible. It left them out.
Yeah.
So we said they have to be included. You just have to add the word spouse. And my colleague, Kato Regan, Irish background, Catholic convent upbringing, schooling, was tougher than me, more radical than me. She said we must write in the word spouse. And I said, no, we refer it to Parliament. Parliament has the same duty to uphold the fundamental rights as the court has to say what those rights are. And I had a feeling that Parliament would come through, that the ANC government would come through, and they did. A lot of homophobic statements were made. I wanted a national discussion. A hot potato, you can try and bury the hot potato, it remains hot. Bring it out into the open. Let the nation engage with it, and let Parliament give same-sex marriages that special backing that you get from legislation. It's not some funny kind of court-ordered document that same-sex couples are being wed by. It's Parliament that say you have the right to do that. And it came to pass that Parliament passed that law. And I remember 2 weeks later, I'm driving to Kirstenbosch. People who know South Africa will know it's the place where you take your granny for tea. Very, very family-oriented. And I'm looking for the sign, and the sign says, for Amy and Jean's marriage. There's a reception on. I felt fantastic. I felt so fantastic. One of those beautiful moments for a judge when you see an outcome that's so sensible and so humane in such an ordinary, banal way. And normally I hate wedding speeches. This was fantastic. The more banal it was, the more excited I felt in the sense of the anti-discrimination was being followed through.
How important do you feel that the independent judiciary is in an emerging democracy like South Africa?
Sure. It's vital. It's vital. If the judiciary is captured, or they don't even have to be captured, if it's supine, they don't even have to be supine. If they just believe in the godlike qualities of the president or the leadership or the army, whatever it is, the chances of democracy are zero. If the judiciary is independent and the judiciary is respected by the people and the constitutional text is clear in terms of the rights of the people, it can play an enormous role. And only just a couple of weeks ago, the justice who took over my chair in the Constitutional Court when I was leaving after 15 years, Sisi Kampepe, not saying any of my wisdom or a lack of wisdom was imparted to her, she, acting Chief Justice of South Africa, issued an instruction to the Ministry of Justice and the head of the police that they must arrest former President Jacob Zuma and send him to prison for defying an order of the court that he participate in a commission of inquiry which he himself had set up. And it was such a victory for the rule of law and for democracy in South Africa that the court, acting in terms of the Constitution with complete independence, and now with a woman at the head, should issue that instruction. And there was a sense of joy throughout the country. Not everybody. A minority were extremely angry and fomented all sorts of mayhem, disorder afterwards, challenging the rule of law, challenging the court and the supremacy of the Constitution. But now I'm totally convinced in South Africa that the judiciary has played a central role, not just an important role, in holding Parliament to account, holding the presidency to account, and enabling people to work together, to vote, to express their views, to organize, to demonstrate a very, very open society, not a fair society, not a just society, in ways that would have been unimaginable without the Constitution, without the court doing its work well and earning the respect of the people.
Well, in Ireland in recent years, there's been a lot of discussion around the prospects of a new Ireland, a united Ireland. And part of that debate has talked about the potential of a new Irish constitution, one that reflects a change in Ireland, that also accommodates or would accommodate a minority unionism within any new Ireland. And what role do you think a new constitution could play in that process, given your experience in South Africa? And how do we then have a constitution for everyone? I know that you gave evidence to the Bill of Rights Committee in recent months, and you talked about any constitution or Bill of Rights, as you were speaking about then, wasn't loyalist or Republican, but was for everybody. So how, if we were in that position, that political space, and the new constitution was on the table, what would your advice be to those who would be drafting that constitution to make it as broad as possible, that it accommodates all the traditions in Ireland?
Right. I wouldn't start with the Constitution. I wouldn't start with a model. I would start with, what do people want? What are their deep concerns? What are their hopes? What are their fears? Just spell them out. Forget about the structures and institutions. And then develop the structures to enable those different aspects to be harmonized. And, we had a huge debate in South Africa. Should we have a federal constitution or a united South Africa? And F became the F word, federation. And we on the ANC side didn't like federation. We saw it as a way of preventing central government from bringing about transformation and change. The other side were fearful of a monolithic ANC government, hegemonic, controlling everybody. And if you argue the merits of federation versus united, you get nowhere. And I discovered that United States of America was more federal than the Federal Republic of Germany, which is more united. So the name could be very, very misleading. Start with what we need. We need strong national government for national tasks, strong regional government for regional tasks, strong local government for local tasks. And how can we reconcile all those? Now, I'm giving that as a kind of a parable. I would say for the community that's supported the Republicans and unity, is a deep emotional ache, it's historic, to feel that they're part of Ireland, that the Irish identity can be acknowledged and recognized. That huge injustices were done by separating the 6 counties from the rest of Ireland. But it wasn't just that. It was the injustices of union became discrimination in practice. Where you lived, where you went to school, the jobs you could get, the access to different things. It was reflected in the structures of society and in your opportunities in life. And the two somehow became intertwined. So a Bill of Rights was seen as mainly to be pro-Republican, anti-discrimination. And surely that would be a purpose. But why should a Bill of Rights be limited only to that? A Bill of Rights should also pick up on the concerns of the loyalist community who identify with the United Kingdom, with English institutions and culture in all sorts of ways, religious and in other ways. That's who they are. That's how they see themselves. They could be protected in that. Now I'm just thinking. There's so many different ways in which that particular identity of a community in Ireland, on that island, as one physical geographical space, could possibly be acknowledged. Quebec in Canada, it has more than just its own legislature. It has its own language, and the Quebec are different in all sorts of ways, in personality, body language, style. And the Bill of Rights for the whole of Canada, in fact, was introduced partly to make people feel whether you're Anglo-speaking, English-speaking, or French-speaking, we all have certain fundamental rights. And Quebec could have a large degree of autonomy in all sorts of ways, its own legal system, and many, many other different aspects. So autonomy within a united country called Ireland. You could have, when I knew I was going to do this interview today, I was trying to think, what's that word? And only half an hour ago, I remembered asymmetry. There can be asymmetry of powers with a large degree of self-government for the North, with a different from, I don't know what the provinces or counties are in Donegal or wherever it is in the rest of Ireland. Something could be fashioned, created, that allows for that special identity within a single country. I pushed really hard for this when I went to the Tamil-speaking parts of Sri Lanka before the war ended. The war ended with the collapse of the Tigers, the killing, with quite a lot of very, very harsh conduct. And somehow the need for reconciliation was subordinated to the military conquest that was achieved. But the idea of a Tamil-speaking, Tamil cultural, that meant Hindu rather than Buddhist, in terms of the religion, more than religion, way of life of that area, it got nowhere. Another thought I had was speaking to people from Israel at a conference in Florence, at the European University in Florence. Mainly, half and half, Jewish law professors from Israel and Arab Israelis, also law professors there. And some people came up with the idea of soft borders, get away from this sovereignty with a fence around the country, that maybe a link could be acknowledged between the Jewish settlers and the West Bank, but also links between Arabs in Israel with Palestinians, Palestinian Israelis, if you like, with Palestinians on the West Bank and in Gaza, and maybe even linked up with the refugees, so that the boundaries and the frontiers don't become the only indices of citizenship or of nationality. Is it possible to have a form of relationship developed that softens the borders, that allows for people who see themselves of British origin, British identification, to continue to have links, educational, through religious organizations, through certain privileges of travel, of movement, of or whatever it might be, maybe even political links with England. Scotland might go its own way. That might create other possibilities. An independent Scotland. So all sorts of new relationships with maybe new terminology being established. Confederation, federation, autonomy, maybe aren't good enough. But you start with what the people want and are willing to live with and go along with. It's not the best of all worlds, but it's the best of the worst of all worlds, or the least worst of the best of all worlds. And that was the way I would go about it. So the Constitution designers don't start off with saying, what do we think is the best way of solving the problems of reconnecting the North with the rest of Ireland? What do we think, speaking to the people there, are the best ways they can live together in harmony, discovering their points of congruence? You know, right now, the British and Irish Lions are visiting South Africa, and the rugby players, I believe, from Dublin and from Belfast, and they scrub down together. And there could be more examples of things of that kind happening and facilitated. So the nomenclature, the classification, the institutions come last. They don't come first. Once you've got them, then they become all important. Then how you design them, how you populate them with the people who've managed them, the principles in terms of which they function become exceptionally important. But you've got to have that basic core foundation. And I haven't quite seen it yet from any side. Now, I'm just an outsider, and I'm working on those intuitions maybe developed over a lifetime of struggling and thinking about a new constitution in our own country and visiting other countries torn apart, trying to find constitutional ways forward.
Those are wise words and some good ideas, Albie, which I'm sure people will take note of when they listen to this presentation. You have a young son, Oliver. He didn't travel to Belfast with you the last time, but like many young men his age, he's football crazy. I think he's a Manchester City fan, if I remember rightly. And he's a proud recipient, I hope, of an Ireland football jersey, although he might have outgrown it by now. In terms of your son, he's grown up in a very different South Africa than you did, but it's a South Africa that's still not free from its problems. And I've heard the term that, you know, a quote that South Africa has achieved political emancipation, but not economic emancipation. I don't know if that's, you want to comment or not, but are you optimistic about the future of South Africa that your son will grow up in?
Yes, I am. And it's based on subjective intuitions and feelings, but it's also based on objective facts. We need each other. We're very interdependent in this country. Industrialization has created one country with communications, interactions. There's no part of South Africa that's really separate from the rest. But we're very divided still inside the different portions of it. We're breaking that down. You know, I've mentioned rugby. The captain of our rugby team is a black person. Rugby, the citadel of white supremacy, of this male masculinist domination and control. And not only that, he captained the team to victory against England. I'm sure many Irish were very happy that we defeated England.
Supporting you very loudly from Belfast.
Well, there you are. So we are making a lot of progress. And even after the mayhem of the recent period, there were communities coming and sweeping up afterwards. Rebuild South Africa, a huge move in that direction. So that gives me hope. There's objective interdependence. We need each other. And we have to contribute. And nobody can exist on their own without the other communities. We want peace. We acknowledge the inequalities to, I think, a greater extent than almost any other country. We're aware We're aware of the massive inequalities. Nobody kind of denies it. And nobody says it's the fault of the poor. You know, they should work harder. There's none of that libertarian kind of a notion. But we realize the systemic problems and faults in our country. And we happen to have, my personal belief, a very brilliant, very wise and thoughtful president right now. But if it's dependent just on one person, that's always a bit flaky. In terms of my relationship with Oliver, it's been quite interesting. A couple of years ago, he was more radical in many ways, age 8, 9, than I was in many ways. Now, I remember at his age, I'm beginning to rebel against my parents and not wanting to assume that they would automatically follow my footsteps, that I would follow in their footsteps automatically. And only in my second year university did I become an activist. But the minute I did, I was ready, clear. So Oliver now is challenging some of my ideas. You say you're working for everybody else, you do a lot of work for nothing, you should be earning more. And I think that's part of his evolution. He'll find his own way. But I think the country will find its own way in is a country very diverse, very rich in culture, rich in inventiveness, rich in humanity, certainly rich in song, in dance, in visual representations. You can't be a political leader if you can't move, if you can't sing. You can't be a trade unionist and go on strike if you can't sing and move. Music comes into everything. It's no accident that our biggest growth industry is stand-up comedians. And we've even exported Trevor Noah to the United States to do a marvelous job there. So that says something about the core of our society, a willingness to laugh, a willingness to sing, to move, a lot of thoughtfulness, an awareness of pain, and the capacities to really make something special out of our country. We've already got a lot that's special. We've had 5 general elections that have been free and fair. We have a very spirited, lively press, great investigative journalists. We have strong civil society. We have a powerful, not as powerful as it used to be, labor movement. We have strong employers' organizations. We have a multiplicity of churches. Maybe it's better to have a lot than just to have one that can dominate. They're all watching each other to make sure none of them take over. But to say there's great vitality and diversity in our society, I have more than hope. I have real expectations.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I've one final question. South Africa has given the word concentration camp and apartheid, but it's also given the healing word of Ubuntu. So, and I've often heard you use that word, and maybe you could tell us what that word means and how that what meaning that could have for a post-conflict society like our own and all those other post-conflict societies around the world.
Well, the 4th word we've given is vuvuzela, but I don't think that's a blessing to the world.
I have one at home from the World Cup back in maybe was it 10, 12 years ago.
Right. The Ubuntu. It was in our transitional constitution for setting up the Truth Commission in an epilogue to that constitutional text, that we must recognize the terrible injustices of the past, but respond to them not in a spirit of vengeance and retaliation, but a spirit of Ubuntu and reconciliation. And Ubuntu is a very powerful African concept of human interdependence. I am a person because you're a person. I can't separate my humanity from acknowledging your humanity. And I enhance my autonomy by recognizing your autonomy, by recognizing the mutuality between us. I don't diminish. It's different from the pure libertarian principle that we all atoms separately competing with each other in the world to get ahead. And don't stop me from doing exactly what the hell I want to do because I'm a free person. It's saying my freedom and your freedom are profoundly interconnected. My rights and your rights are profoundly interconnected. And it's been extremely helpful to us on the court. It's not a technical term in the Constitution. It's not given a definition, but we know what it means. And it came initially on our court from Justice Yvonne Mokgoro in the very first case we had on capital punishment. And she said, if you follow the spirit of Ubuntu, the state doesn't take the life cold-bloodedly of another human being, because we are all interdependent. If we kill another human being, we are injuring ourselves, because that person, whatever he or she has done, however abominable behavior, is part and parcel of our human society. And so we find it reconciles the communitarian spirit of interdependence, if you like, with the libertarian spirit, because it also implies each person is unique and worthy of respect as an individual. I call it the dignitarian principle. Human dignity combines liberty with sociability. And that enables people to articulate their personal choices, to develop their lives in the way that they want, to have an area of privacy, autonomy that's personal to themselves, but at the same time, in the context of an organic society with other people with the same desires, hopes, aspirations, but different ways of expressing them through the dignitarian principle. And so Ubuntu, I believe, is valuable, not just for people of South Africa, but not just for the continent of Africa, but for the people everywhere in the world. Get away from a purely collectivist position, imposing your will for the sake of the greater good, denying personal autonomy. Get away from the purely libertarian position. I can do what I damn well like. Pollute the world as long as I'm not breaking the law, injuring somebody else, to the dignitarian position of what we call Ubuntu. And the fact that it's deeply rooted in African culture and tradition means it's not some kind of foreign implant. Maybe if it was sent to Northern Ireland or to Ireland, it would be a foreign word and could look like a foreign implant. But I sense there's something in Irish culture, deep down ancient, that's very, very similar, of interdependence, not simply a nationalistic, we are the greatest, or we have been the most harmed, but that sense of intense, deep humanity that everybody shares. And I think it could be found all over the world, something like that, and it would be a great benefit to the whole world.
Okay, Albie, listen, thanks very much. We say in Ireland, Gura Malgat, you're, as always, a thoughtful speaker, a great storyteller. And every time I speak to you, I feel like I've learned something, and I'm certainly inspired, as I have been today. Say hello to Vanessa and Oliver as well, and hopefully I see you sometime again in person in Belfast at Féile and Phobail. We'd all love to have you back. It's just a pity we're not in a room with an audience doing this and having a question and answer session after, but this is the next best thing in the world we're living at the minute. So it's a great privilege and honor to speak to you, and I'm sure our audience will feel that was a very special presentation. So, Gurmagat and Slán.